Sure. Mission.
So,
Mission.
thank you so much for joining me from the winter in South Africa. It still kind of freaks me out a bit that we only have 1 hour time difference, yet 6 months of weather difference. But still, when we were talking a few minutes ago, I think your winter is probably comparable to our summer, except our summer's a bit unusual at the moment. The reason we're here is because I saw something quite extraordinary on Facebook that made me super curious about who you guys are and what you're doing. And it was an ebook that you were offering to anyone who is interested on the most sort of profoundly ethical slaughter that I've ever come across. But first of all, could I just ask you to give us your background, your story, and tell us how you came to be where you are and doing what you're doing?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this sharing of information, because that's what it is, right? It's
Absolutely
sharing of information. And my name is Akim Riemer, Green Guerrillas. And 15 years ago, to give you the executive version, I launched into the abyss perhaps, and started looking at a form of sustainability, farming, what is known as regenerative agriculture, etc., and came to that point of having to slaughter my first animal, a pig. And that's where the story, I suppose, begins. And even though I had a background in hunting and understanding of life and growing food, I'd never really, I suppose, faced myself in looking at it from a more open mind. So mind is like a parachute, which is just open. And when it's an animal that you've nurtured and raised, it was my first pig. So I remember bringing them home, 5 pigs. My wife obviously was very interested. We were farming, they were going this direction, and now I had to slaughter them. There was a time. There was no time to put bacon on the table. And this is 15 years ago. As mentioned, I'm not a very technical genius, so I look at books, and I suppose the biggest problem that crossed my mind was about transportation. Transportation. So, having got a little bit of learned, when you're working with pigs, you don't work while you farm them, you live with pigs. It maybe doesn't sound, but you in a small scale version, you live with them. They become part of your life. You get to understand their physiology, their likes, their no likes, and you begin to put things together. And I kind of realized transporting these animals was going to make them feel very, very uncomfortable. So it made most logical sense for me was to be able to harvest them at that point. You can hear me?
I've unmuted myself to cut down background noise at my end, but when I need to talk.
Okay, got you. Okay, so, and that's kind of where my journey started. It was 15 years ago. I wouldn't say I went into it blind, but you kind of realize there's not much information. That's one of my passions of sharing the knowledge and sharing the information, because there was nobody there to help me out. There was nobody there to listen to my concerns and to say, well, I understand where you're coming from. Have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? So yes, I had my first harvest, and it was terrible. I can't hide. It was
terrible, as in like emotionally difficult, or physically difficult?
Yeah, it's a bottle of whiskey on its own. It just, I mean, we're going to be talking for hours about it. It was horrible. It was just horrible, horrific. And I went back to the drawing board, and I realized it was more based, I mean, look, it's such a massive topic, and we're talking about empathy farming, we're talking about zero stress slaughter, we're talking about being able to harvest an animal in a place where it doesn't feel the terror and misery it normally has to go through.
Yeah.
Because I've put so much effort in looking after this animal, I've put so much effort into feeding it, I've put so much effort in so many things. This is now the test. Nevertheless, the second one, I mean, look, this is 15 years ago, so we're going back in the archives now. But I remember the second one, one of the, obviously the things that I picked on the most, obviously, was the physiology, the state of the animal. You're about to harvest, to kill, to slaughter an animal in that state, and how you approach it. So I got creative, and I used 2 bottles of vodka in grain to subdue the animal, to the pig. Again, 15 years back, looking very primitive methods, looking at ways of how I could make this transition from life to death as easy as possible, because I felt it was my obligation and moral.
Absolutely.
It kind of worked. It was more easier. The animal was subdued. We ate the liver afterwards, but it didn't work. So I thought I'd cash in that bottle of vodka that we had. No, it didn't work. So nevertheless, I actually, at that time, I connected with a retired vet, quite an eccentric vet from the UK, actually. I was on the run, or I don't know what her story was, but I spoke to her, and I kind of got a little bit of more insight, I suppose, from a scientific veterinarian perspective. And she helped me point things, and she helped me get my hands on, loan it for me for the first time, was a handheld captive bolt.
Right, that's what you were using in the videos that you sent me ahead of this call, or that Anki sent me, which is, I mean, it looks kind of like, to me, like a sort of a lightsaber handle.
Yes.
It's, about a foot and a half long, and there's a bolt that comes out about 6 inches or so. And is it an explosive charge, you said, in that? Do you
Yes.
load it with like a shotgun cartridge or something like that, or how does that work?
It's actually, for guys in construction, would identify with something called a Hilti gun, when you use a charge to send a nail into a concrete surface. So this uses a blank charge.
Okay.
You put a blank charge in, and look, it's very primitive. And when you fire away, obviously that explosion, that energy forces the bolt through. But it's handheld. You can hide it in your hand. You can hide it behind your back at smoke and mirrors. And that was my third harvest, 2 large whites. And it was a game changer for me. And from there, it was the process of, I suppose in essence was, the focus on starting with a 0 slaughter stress and looking how to achieve that. And what that then led to me, because it opened up so many different avenues, and from herd animals, from working with bovines in the field, picking up on certain energies, to horses, to pigs, etc. And that's what that rabbit hole was has been for the last 15 years, exploring that aspect.
So, are you now? You're operating on a relatively kind of small scale now, right? And you guys are in the Southern Cape. Tell me about the land that you're on and the farm that you're working with, and sort of the scale that you're doing things on. Because, as I understand it, you're not sort of just a commercial farmer. You're not sort of producing for food, but you're operating as a sort of educational hub. Tell me about that. Tell me about the land, the scale, and what you're doing that's sort of for the broader community. Because, as I understand, this is you have a very educational base to your operation there.
Absolutely. The first part is that, and I'll say in the peak of our operations, we worked obviously with pigs, and we ran 219 pigs on 1 hectare, on 10,000 square meters. That was based on 10 sows, and then in the cycle, obviously, they're outdoor pigs in sand. The pig meets the world through its snout, through its smell. It was outdoor. And through that, because everything that we do, everything I have been doing would be completely illegal in the UK.
Right.
I'd trigger so many laws. I couldn't even get out of bed in the UK doing what I do. In South Africa, I can get further than my bed. I can get to the bathroom. And through this was based on sort of fractional farming, or CSA farming, or community supported agriculture, where we found almost a loophole, in the sense, if you can't slaughter an animal at place of birth, sort of commercially, and be able to sell it.
No, you can't here either. I'm sure you know that, but
Yeah.
you can if it's for personal consumption.
for personal
So if it's for
consumption.
family consumption on the farm, you can. But I think that there is some really interesting developments here, because there is a group of farmers who are part of an organisation called the PFLA, or Pasture Fed Livestock Association, and they're trying to develop a mobile abattoir to actually go to the farm, drive into the field, animals walk in one by one, bolt gun, and then taken away from the farm, so no transportation. But I think there are. There's some campaigning for the law to change around that, because
it will take time, and for us, it's the same in South Africa. I mean, our laws in South Africa, some of the laws are old apartheid laws. We're in democratic South Africa, but some of the laws are still old apartheid laws. And with the Meat Act, the emphasis was based on setting up systems where people could be there part of, because I'm not sending an animal to the abattoir. But and through this process, I suppose, has incited me and enlightened me more on how to do it, how to achieve it. So the emphasis of that is based on, I suppose, smoke and mirrors, and understanding that the animal that you're going to be harvesting, and then maybe putting together, beyond a marketing perspective, that 50% of how important it is what an animal has been fed, and 50% is going to be as important to how it was harvested. Through that, it's kind of looking at it from a perspective of that, even though that we kind of maybe differentiate ourselves of the fact that we're dealing with a domesticated animal, it's a goat, it's a sheep, it's a cow, it is still an animal. It's a mammal, it's a breathing animal, it has senses, it has a brain, it's sentient, it has all of the above. So therefore, to me, it allowed me to, I suppose, look further deep into that. And that was then looking at ways of, for instance, understanding the animal's routine, understanding how, even in a case where harvesting, I mean, it's just a point, and perhaps will be things that we've spoken in later time, but if you have a herd animal, so imagine you have a group of, let's say, beautiful pasture-raised cattle, and they're in the field. Now you want to take one of them away. It's however gruesome it sounds, but letting the animal die as quickly as possible, surrounded by the other animals, for me makes more sense. Because animals actually want to say goodbye, and that you watch them do it. They walk past, they give a sniff, especially bovines. They walk past, they give a sniff, and they walk on, and then moving it. So the animal has been harvested at a place of birth. It has also been placed where the herd can understand that this animal has now left. And it seems that they're more taking consideration from an emotional perspective, that there's more grass for them to harvest on. So in the same sense with looking at, with pigs, but pigs are extremely intelligent animals, but also understanding that they're perhaps a little bit OCD. And in a way, if you wanted to harvest an animal, yes, a mobile abattoir is fun, but you need to coincide it with a variety of sort of physiological aspects of the animal, and how the animal is, and how the animal is going to, it's going to death now, and how it's going to be able to move in that direction. So for instance, pigs, OCD, they're routine orientated. So when harvesting, incorporating that into that aspect. So for me, when I would harvest a pig, when I'd slaughter a pig, however you want to be interpreted, it's based on that routine. I have a very strict routine that I'm going to follow, and I follow that routine, so the animal is not expecting anything like that. So I think it's a smoking mirror.
So the routine that the pigs are in, I didn't know that about pigs. I didn't know they were so kind of routine-based, but is the idea then to almost insert the slaughter into a part of the normal routine of the pig, so it doesn't think anything different is happening that day? Is that kind of what you mean?
Yes. So it's just another day on the farm.
Right.
It's another day on the farm. It's just another process where, but in certain aspects, look, sometimes you'll come across a situation where it just doesn't work that way. It looks great on paper, it looks fantastic for the intellectuals, but it just doesn't work like that for the farm on the ground. So therefore, there have to be sort of a plan B, or a different version to account in the same sense. But it's kind of, and also with a pig, everything is about feed.
About feed.
About feed.
Yep.
So it's about the day before, you have put them on microgreens, because I've fed my pigs microgreens, which is barley grass, 7-day-old microgreens. And they won't get the nice nummy stuff, let's say some eggs, or they're just going to get microgreens. So their appetite is going to be slightly more perky than it was, so you have an animal that has a perky appetite, that knows there's a routine, that knows exactly everything, how it's going to follow. And then in that space, you get to stun it and slit its throat. And to do that within a process of 3.5 to 4.5 seconds. The 4.5 seconds is when you're slitting an animal's throat in that area, is to show that it is lifted, the neck is lifted off the ground. So it's from like that aspect, but it's the fact of isolating the animal for where it is. It is an environment where it's just another day on the farm, and within that process, being able to, yes, harvest that animal, slaughter that animal in its environment. From that point, the story for me, because I suppose I'm an amateur, love to cook, love food, where it comes from. That part for me is still animal, because it is in that process, and have spending so many times and over the years, it is certainly a connection, understanding that it is the animal has a spirit, and in that process of it being stunned and its throat being cut. And the reason why we do that is simply because we need to exit the blood out of the vessel of the meat that we are going to eat.
Sure. Can I just ask it something a bit more fundamental back there? So the stunning is using the captive bolt. But when you say stun, effectively, we're not talking about just being knocked unconscious, are we? It is, you're rendering the animal brain dead at that point, because the bolt is going, I saw the video of you doing it, and it's that far, presumably into the brainstem.
The animal is dead by the time it hits the ground.
Right. So massive kind of brain trauma, like, so that all the wiring is gone. But I'm completely ignorant of this. But there is a period of time where the heart is still beating.
Yes.
And that's what allows you to remove the blood from the body. So how long have you got while the heart is still going? And is that just a physiological thing?
Well, it's as mentioned. Okay, so yes, as correct. The captive bolt goes into the brain stream. Bearing in mind, one needs to have a certain amount. Although pigs are extremely intelligent, and the amount of area that you have to go through, the brain is quite small, and you have to disrupt that brain stream. And from that aspect, that animal's heart could beat for another 5 minutes, another 7 minutes, 10 minutes. But the point would be is that you are going to be cutting its throat. Yep. So it doesn't feel any pain. For me, has always been to get between stunning the animal, disrupting the brain stream, and slitting its throat as fast as possible. And that would be something that I've always worked on, as fast as possible, because the animal is rendered clinically unconscious, clinically brain dead. And now, while that heart is beating, to allow that blood to leave. But it's in that process and in that understanding that the energy of that animal, the spirit of that animal, it leaves. And it is, as ever strange it sounds, it seems that the animal becomes lighter, but it's heavier to carry. It is a notion. Many times I would be able to put my hand, because for me, before we can move the animal, we need to make sure that it's clinically dead and it's spiritually dead. That part is very important, because then it becomes the carcass. Then it becomes meat, and then it becomes
it's that transition between a living animal and a carcass. It's that period, identifying that transition, I guess.
And look, I suppose from a scientific scale, my view is like a raindrop. It's perhaps maybe 500, 600, 800 pigs I've personally slaughtered myself. So I've seen it that many times. And within that process of an animal being stunned and its throat being cut to the time that you would regard it to be clinically dead, the process is actually always a little bit different. And sometimes it seems that sometimes that part of that animal is staying a lot longer than normal.
It's just observations. It is just observations without sort of voodoo and hocus pocus. It is an energy that you feel. And I think that it's more for me about, I think, a sense of accountability, maybe us as Homo sapiens or these creatures that run around, there's all the technical way, but it's maybe ingrained in our DNA, our understanding of meat, our understanding of an animal, understanding of taking the life of an animal, that connection that we have been devoid from, that connection that we've been disconnected from. We have been engineered into something completely different.
Yeah.
And when you are working with it, you say, no, it's there, man. It's fucking there. It's really there. It is there. It is there. And it empowers you. And what it did for me, it empowered me further to go beyond what I thought that I knew, and to find out more, to go beyond, and to truly, really critically try understand that process. And that process, I suppose, is that process from stun to cardiovascular open and to the spirits moving of that animal. And I think it's a very important process, and perhaps it's not something that's maybe in all the textbooks or in all the home studies or
Absolutely, I'm not. As I said off camera before we started recording, I've done an awful lot. I mean, obviously we're called the Ethical Butcher. We're trying to do everything we can to be as ethical as possible throughout the entire supply chain. And the one part of the process that I've freely admitted kind of I as a business owner have the least amount of control over is the slaughter process. We rely on our farmers to take the animals to whichever abattoir they feel will provide the best or the least stressful slaughter at the end of life. But that varies, and some of them are very big industrial units that have been designed around the Temple Grandin principle of humane slaughter, and some are small kind of countryside units. But it's it's an awkward conversation that I as a business have the least amount of control over, and I would like to understand better. And I think what, the way you're describing it, how do you think that your awareness could scale up? Because obviously when animals are taken to an abattoir, I've watched the video you sent me of the way that you are harvesting an animal, and I would pretty much put money on the fact that there is no stress hormones in that meat. That the animal does not have any awareness of what is about to happen, what is happening. It is an instant moment of life and death. Like from my observation, I think you've just described it slightly differently, but the consciousness is an instant moment of life and death. It's not like there is no possibility to have an adrenal response or a stress response. There's no time there. There's no awareness of that. And I think that is, I'm sure that will have a bearing on not just the flavor, but the kind of nutritional and, if you like, the spiritual nutritional quality of consuming that animal. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. Sure. Firstly, a pig can smell a dead dove in 2 meters of snow. So you can have any roundabout that you want to come up with, whatever. The system is that this is an animal that meets the world through its smell. I mean, they have an incredible smell. And with that, it's kind of with being able to harvest an animal exactly as you mentioned, it was zero stress slaughter, in the fact that it would never see it coming. It's going to impact on the flavor of your meat. But as I mentioned, I think, with farming, feed is a massive important role, and we take feed as a very, very important role. And I feel that we have ignored the harvesting aspect of that. But it is just kind of almost, as it perceives today, an unrealistic approach to explore, because it just doesn't make sense. I think Margaret Thatcher closed all the small abattoirs in the UK. There was a whole concept of industrialization. Now you have just like a couple of big abattoirs. I'm not too sure how the system works now, but it's certainly
you know, the saying
There is a
goes,
definite lack of small abattoirs, and they are closing quickly. I think a few years ago there were quite a few, but the thing I constantly hear from farmers is a frustration at having to travel further than they would like to, and it's super frustrating for me. You know, you've got these guys who are treating their animals so well. You know, they really are living the most privileged, I guess. You know, it might sound like a strange way of putting it, but that they have minimal human intervention. They have a perfectly curated diet. They have medical attention if and when needed. Interpersonal relationships are to a degree controlled with suckler herds. The end of life isn't as good as it could be, and it's frustrating to me.
well, I think, you know, it's been my whole drive of in search of the holy grail of chop, you know, the pork chop, the holy grail of the pork chop. And, you know, and that, I suppose, you know, looking at, and I mean, we have got to keep the lights on. And if you can, when you're young, you're young and naive and liberal, and you've got all these great ideas, and then you have children, and those will go out the window. So you look at ways. So for me, I think one of the aspects was looking at is approaching like-minded people and saying, well, here's a system where we can actually harvest an animal with zero stress. And the flavor is going to be next level, and it is. That's the beautiful thing. It is next level. See, the challenge is the laws, and you think to yourself, you know, you believe in something. I love eating meat. I don't plan on going on lentils. I mean, I could lose a couple of kilos, I understand that, but beer drinking and meat eating just seems to go up there with farming life. Keeps me strong and be able to push the wheelbarrow. But it doesn't mean that the meat that I'm eating has to come from an animal that has to suffer. It doesn't mean that the meat that I'm eating has come from an animal that has to piss itself and shit itself because here comes death coming. So, and there are a lot of people out there that feel exactly the same. I mean, vegans have eaten my meat and say, "Oh, we'll eat your meat, Akim, because we know where it comes from. We're having that bacon craving," you know, like a heroin crack merchant sometimes to the vegans. I mean, they won't admit it ever, but yes, absolutely. But the challenge is it's just the laws, and I think it's based on people just voicing their voice, and everyone sits down and they comment on Facebook, or they have an asshole opinion or an intellectual wank, and that's pretty much where it stays. But for me, I think, you know, the luxury of doing nothing has passed, and as our food sovereignty slowly gets taken away from us bit by bit by bit, there's so many things that we can do, and especially in the fact that, you know, farmers don't really want to do the things that they are doing, but it's about money. It's about putting the lights on. You know, what kept our concept going for such a long time was just the flavor that people say, "I can't believe that this is pork." And we took it to the limits, you know. So yes.
Talking about that, you've mentioned two things that affect flavor: is stress at the end of life, but also the most important one possibly is feed. So a couple of things as you've been talking that have made me, I'll come up with a couple of questions. Is you have a great deal of respect for the animals that you're looking for, and you credit them with intelligence. And why pigs? And what do pigs kind of offer in terms of, you know, you mentioned regenerating the land. How do pigs fit into your world? How come pigs rather than chickens, goats, sheep, cattle? What was it?
Bottle of whiskey stories here, mate. You know, we're going to talk for hours. But I mean, in short, you know, look, I mean, I'm a closet soul nerd with a fetish for the earth. You know, I'm very interested in microbes. I'm very interested in how the system is working, and how what I call dancing with nature. And there is no other animal on this earth that is firstly the master recycler.
Master recycler, right.
The master recycler. I mean, get rid of your mother-in-law. I mean, get rid of the neighbor's cat. I mean, you're talking about
it will all just be turned into soil nutrition in the end.
And the way that, you know, that you can work with animals, because a lot of the aspects of raising pigs for me was allowing the animal to follow its natural behavior. So when you look at meat, now we're going back to the holy grail of meat. So the conversation has to shift. So you're after the holy grail of the pork chop. And in order to do that, it's graded in a certain way.
if an animal is confined to a cement box, it will never use its muscles. It will never walk around. It will never sniff the daisy. It will never suntan its teeth in the sun. It'll never do that. So you want to make sure that the animal can, as close as possible, as realistically as possible, without being Alice in Wonderland and coming up with this sort of fantastic, with our Tibetan flags and hippie ideologies of how the pig should be raised, because we want to eat it. But then in order to do that is using the pigs to turn compost. So I would go buy a packet of, you won't know the brand, it's called Simba. It's like a nuts and raisins. It's like maybe like, I don't know, like 5p for like a packet of nuts and raisins. It's like a small little packet. And I take a big heavy stick, and I'd be able to, for me, it was moving the pigs all the time, changing the bottom of the environment. But in the process of moving them and working with a small herd is that they would maximize what they were giving for me. So then I would have a sort of a static compost line, a passive compost line, and I wanted it turned. But we're talking about 20 running meters by 2 meters out. I mean, it's maybe, I don't know, 20 cubes of 20 tons, 20,000 liters of compost. So I took this like 5p or this 20 cents or 30 cents packet of nuts and raisins, and I took a big pole and I stuck holes in it. And while I was dropping those little peanuts in, I was thinking that, this is an animal that can smell a dead pigeon in 2 meters of snow. So imagine, and I love these things. Peanuts and raisins are amazing. Now the smell of peanuts and raisins. So, and voila, here you go. Come back, and they've spent the afternoon looking for this peanuts and raisin. It hasn't differentiated on
digging the earth up,
turning it, looking for it, because they can smell it. They're after it. So it's the same with turning soil, and so therefore the pig. And I think, especially, my emphasis has been based in I'm not a rural farmer, and rural farming and urban agriculture are two different kinds of farming. Urban agriculture has been defined, but the laws kind of restricted, they permit it to merely be like sort of on some picture of spinach and things like that. But when you look at animal husbandry, it's a little bit different. But the point to waste is about waste, and waste is like the hands of time. It doesn't stop. So therefore, incorporating pigs into a place where they can follow their natural behavior, you have an unlimited source. I don't think you would be able to do that in the UK, at least not to sell it to somebody. You see, the difference here is that I could, in South Africa, I could probably run my pigs this way, but I could put them on a truck and I could send them to an abattoir, and I could sell them to a deli, or I could sell them to a butcher like you. Yep. But then for me, it defines the principle. And that's why I'm a poorer farmer that has just eaten too much pork in his time, because the challenge of that. But the system is that when you ask why pigs, it's just they solve so many problems that we have, and organic waste is one of them.
Right. So what are you feeding them then? Where are you getting their food from? Because my understanding historically of pigs in the UK is that, like, a lot of families would have had a pig. It would have eaten all the kitchen scraps. It would have been, as you said, it was like the recycling food bin of the old world. And any food waste, any harvest waste, any spoiled crops, any slightly rotten vegetables, any unused eggs, any things off people's plates that weren't eaten would be put through the pig, which at the end of the year would provide that nutrition back again. And I know there's a bit of a campaign in the UK, again, to allow heat-treated food waste to be fed back to, the omnivorous monogastrics, the chickens and the pigs. And it would save billions it would save huge quantities of carbon, because food waste is going to rot and form greenhouse gases regardless of what you do with it. My thoughts are
it's not good business for the feed guys. There probably might be like a dark vehicle outside your house and some guys following you with headsets, because and that's what it's about. Because yes, you're talking about swirl, but there's other attributes of that. With regards to the feed of the diet, a lot of a portion of what we've looked at is vegetarian waste, greens. There's a lot of greens. We wasted quite a bit of greens, but that doesn't answer your protein angle. So what we did with pigs is, this is where, using them from the point, and I don't want to dwell too much, but looking at bio-integrated farming. So within bio-integrated farming, I took pigs chickens, and compost worms. And I looked at
Okay.
organic waste coming through that stream. And within that, balancing it so it could work as tight as possible as a closed loop system, but still have the input of the energy that is 3 kilometers away from me that I can go pick a cube of. With that, working with 1 ton of compost worms, I'm able to create very powerful soil. And from that, I can make microgreens. So that's barley seed, and it's going to multiply its nutritional protein, calcium, phosphate, all of that, which I can
So you're growing that on site? You're growing a lot of what is fed to the pigs on your own land?
Yes. Well, the things that we're speaking about, we've moved away for a variety of reasons, but we're talking of how we achieved it. And with that, it is based on the protein, because with the animals, outdoor pigs take a longer time to get to, let's say, harvest size, because they're running around a lot more, they're using more energy.
Burning off the calories and
burning off the calories and not putting it on. So protein, and then dividing half the yield of the eggs, okay, of the chickens, to go back to the pigs, especially the lactating pigs, because what in essence what it does, and it comes in with the composting worms, and then also looking at free energy. So there's certain availability of free energy that we looked at. So we looked at it from our aspect as what we regard as a protein crunch. We're looking forward, we're going to run out of protein. Protein is going to become out of our hands. And then looking at how to achieve that from closed loop systems based on, but combining it with empathy farming, combining with the aspect. But unfortunately, it's unable to unfold as a commercial venture because it breaks all the laws. It would be completely illegal. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that.
I've got you. But when you say closed loop system, how close are you to getting to a point where the inputs on your farm are sunlight and rainwater? Presumably that's the end goal. Is that the only inputs are that?
Yeah, look, I mean, that, like, from a permaculture perspective, tomorrow morning, I've got that dusted. I'll do it with my eyes closed, right? But then it's just for me and my family. I live next to a township of 80,000 people. It's 80,000 people with an unemployment of the youth of 80%, with inflation going through the roof at the moment, where people are starving, where we have a country where malnutrition starts in the womb in our country, in South Africa. Look, they don't put it in the pamphlets what the politicians are handing out, but malnutrition starts in the womb. People have stunted growth. We have entire generations approaching us that are just not going to be able to achieve their free education because they won't have the cognitive abilities to do so. So yes, I can do it close, but then it's just for me. But then I need to build like a 200-meter fence around my farm because the hungry people are going to want to eat food. So the point is, our problem is a collective problem. We need to look at it. So that's where I've applied my energy. You mentioned earlier about education, yes, because I feel that, what we need is a revolution, and the first revolution is education. It's not cocking a weapon. It's not putting a round in the barrel. It's actually education. Give people the knowledge. Our country, South Africa, it's a country where people have been set up for failure, and certainly when it comes to education. So looking at the elements of looking from profitability, maybe seeing it as I'm a capitalist with a Karl Marx blind spot, looking at it a way where if there's no profitability in it, how are we going to make it successful? We can all blah, blah, blah until the cows come home, and it can sound fantastic, but it needs to make profit. And this kind of opened up the next aspect of, from the shitstorm that I kind of had to endure myself through. And that was, we looked at kind of making the concept as bulletproof as possible of what we are doing. And in order to do that, we put it on social platforms. And I'd kind of like people, some of the stuff that we've put out has gone viral and in Anchorage, we're in South Africa. And there was a concept we put out called Adopt a Pig to Eat. That broke Facebook for a little bit, and with the impact that it came was quite phenomenal. But one of the concepts for me was based on, if we are unable to make it profitable, we cannot promote it. And as soon as I promoted on social media, we got pounded, but quite hard. And that was kind of okay. But what happened afterwards, what the reactions of that. And what I put it forward when people said to me, yeah, but Akim, why did you put that on Facebook? How can you do that? And so, well, it was just the truth. I was just putting a point of view. I was asking a question. I was putting something out there. And it's maybe similar to as a welder would weld a piece of metal, and he would then take a 4-pound hammer and hit it hard to see if it was breaking. But what the problem for me is that I didn't realize how big the resistance is to what I'm doing, and how they actually can kick the shit out of you, and hurt you. And that is when the authorities come knocking on your door. And that's what happened to me, which was interesting because, you know, it allowed me to test what we were doing. And so firstly, we had, I put our post down. It had about 150,000 views. It had maybe a couple of thousands.
Which post was this? Was this something that's on your site currently?
Look, this was my more understanding the resistance, I suppose, like, you know, right. to put, we're talking about empathy farming, we're talking about all the things. Yes, it's fantastic. Okay, right, how do we move forward? Well, we've got to look at the resistance. There is a resistance to it, and how the resistance works. And I think this was in 2016 where I kind of got a real insight of this resistance. And one of the attributes was looking at a way of sort of promoting what we're doing with fractional farming, with community supported agriculture. And look, understanding now, maybe I realize in hindsight, it wasn't the most fantastic wording, but I said, adopt a pig to eat. And okay, now look, they lost their shit. The vegans lost their shit.
Yeah.
But kind of for me, the empathy, because for them, the thing that upset them the most, that I was using the word eat and adopt and putting that together. Okay, that really, I mean, there was protest outside my house. There was Facebook. It was on the radio. It was interesting. But what it did do is that up until that time, I had already been farming for 3 or 4 years. I mean, I'd been gathering momentum, I'd been my understanding and being able to launch something. But right there, because what had happened is that the authorities came knocking on my door. And that was kind of like, because people complained. And so when I start talking about the topic that I'm talking about, I'm regarded as Jeffrey Dahmer. So Jeffrey Dahmer was a homosexual, carnivore, rapist, serial killer, psychopath. So that's what Jeffrey Dahmer was. So that's what I get, because I get regarded as an animal abuser, that I'm abusing animals' rights, because I'm bringing to the forefront a topic that I'd like to talk about, but there is a resistance to it. So yes, I got the shit kicked out of me properly.
But I know that one very, very, very well. I mean, I've received death threats through social media, through email, telephone calls, and the thing that sort of always puzzled me is the fact that you and we're the ones trying to do this better than 99% of the industries that we're involved in, and we're asking the questions that no one else asks, and yet we still become quite a strong target. And I think in some ways, one of the reasons why you got targeted and we get targeted is everybody can accept the horrors of industrial farming, but we are giving validity to the consumption of animals through doing things better. And that's awkward for people who have made an ethical stance not to eat them. It's challenging their black and white notion of animals equal bad, plants equal good for their health, environment, the whole kind of wraparound. But yeah, I feel you on that one. But I really want to kind of try and pick up a bit on what you're doing now with the community. You mentioned that you live next to a big township that experiences a lot of, and the difficulties at the moment with food security and poverty in South Africa. But I know you're doing a lot of outreach, and that your farm is a sort of educational base. So tell me what you're doing, because I've seen the films of you educating and teaching young people who potentially could be tomorrow's farmers. How's that working, and what's that program doing?
It's something that we've been driving for quite some time, in the certain belief that in South Africa, our youth are rotting. And I think across the board, they just lack aptitude and physical ability to do anything. I mean, it is what it is. And I think certainly let down. We've obviously gone through COVID. We can't blame all the things that have come past. So certainly looking at firstly a process of not giving out free meals, not just giving handouts, reaching out to those who have an aptitude. If you take 100 people in a room and said, "Hey, who wants to raise pigs?" 3 idiots are going to put their hand up. I promise you, I'll be one of them. I'll be one of them. So being able to have a vetting process where you can reach out to the young people who have an aptitude, have a connection, and then been looking at ways of inspiring them through entrepreneurial ways and ways to be able to look at waste stabilization, ways to look at animal husbandry, whether it be horticulture, etc., and to combine it and hopefully, and then also starting it from from obviously an after school, and then looking at from an in-school perspective, because we just feel that in schools, the youth never really get exposed to farming, get exposed to a variety of things. And it's kind of like you never know what will inspire you. You're 16 years old and you kind of, your interest level is here, and somebody just plucks you out of that little comfort zone from your phone and just exposes you to something.
And
I don't know.
Something might stick within all that.
Something might stick.
You
know, being part of an animal being slaughtered. You know, if you all jump on your Vienna or your whatever, and it's like just being exposed to that. And even the fact that we've been working with university students, second year studying veterinary science, and say, but we haven't been exposed to this yet, and they're in their 20s.
Wow.
So it's a very academic approach. It's a very academic. It's Latin names and things I get lost on, but it's not a very practical look. And I think in order for us to start understanding and looking at the challenge that we're facing, we need to have a bit of a practical approach. And also from my side, I think, more from a way of looking sort of, the possibilities of any form of salvation in South Africa would be smaller farms based on 1 to 2 or 3 hectares. It seems that will be perhaps the only salvation that this country is going to have. Yes, we have a food security problem. It's not going to go away. We have an unemployment problem. But I think the sad part for me, and having spent the time that I have looking at perhaps a very small aspect of regenerative agriculture or small little points of it that I've looked at, but seeing how it is scalable to our country and looking at it, a fact that it is. It's just minus the education part, so that the education part is imperative. That's 50% of really the entire way forward, and so that's why we feel myself very passionate about it. And this is a country that I love. I love South Africa. So I don't know if you've ever been here. It's a beautiful place. Get on the airplane. It's cooler right now. Come to winter in South Africa. It's like proper UK summer.
No, I'll tell you what. I'll come down when it's winter here and it's miserable. I love your area. I love Cape Town. I've spent quite a bit of time there in my previous life as a fashion photographer. We used to come down in the English winter and shoot in. Stay in Camps Bay area and drive down and shoot in those areas. And I spent 2 wonderful, quite surreal weeks in the Karoo at a place called Mikey's Fontaine, which was quite an unusual place to spend a couple of weeks. But so what's your day to day then? Are you apart from running a farm, how often are people coming? How does the education, the outreach work? You've mentioned you've got people who are kind of young potential farmers, you've got veterinary students, you've got all kinds of. Are you really set up then as a sort of visitor hub, as a place? I can imagine that I've seen the material that you've put out, and I think you are a very passionate educator, and you're obviously very passionate about your subject. What's an average week look like on your place?
Chaos, madness. You need Valium for breakfast. Shape shifting and
but it sounds like you like it like that, huh? Does that suit your brain?
Well, there's no rest for the wicked, obviously. But look, I think these are critical times at the moment. We're basically a 1 hectare outdoor classroom. That's what seems more viable. I'm working with 1 ton of composting worms. I'm picking up about 2 tons of organic waste a day. Sometimes I will get a call and somebody will say like, oh, I've got something like, and so that actually is more based on the process of composting, looking at sort of processing that matter, and more focusing on education and more looking, we're about to look at something more based on fractional farming where we wanted to take it a step further, and we thought, well, kind of people can kind of join like a club, or whatever, they are the club where they are actually the farmer as such. So yeah, so it's a continuous process, and I think one of the aspects for me to get here where I am is that I had to make friends with failure. So I've made friends with that creature and make friends every single day and exploring, looking at aspects. We're working on a very exciting project now at the moment called The Cheapest Egg in Africa, where we would want to produce 6 organic eggs at a school for the price. I mean, it would be 50, it would be 5 rand. I don't know, that would be like 10p, 15p. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that we would like to identify is that, I mean, no matter what your eating ideology is, that if you want a young human being to grow, it needs protein for the brain. So if people have, let's say, maize or rice, and that's all that they're eating, they're actually unable to maximize. And the reality is that it's not affordable or available in that sense. So for us, looking at all the things that we have done over the years, the last 15 years, of creating closed loop systems that's based on organic matter, that's based on, I mean, we breed insects, we breed crickets, we breed mealworms, I mean, microgreens, putting it all together and using numbers. Farmers will hate this word and they'll come burn crosses outside my house for it, but I'm very pro labor intensive farming, especially for a country like South Africa. No, I am.
I've never heard those words spoken before.
I know it sounds rough, and that's why I have to have a big gate and lots of dogs around me. But in a country, you see, there's no such thing as a poor country. There are poor people, yes, but there's no such, we are a rich country. South Africa is a rich country. It has so much potential. And the people think that it's a poor country, but it's not. Looking at labor-intensive solutions makes sense to me. Looking at it in the aspects that we're doing, being able to expand it further makes sense to me, because the other solution is complete anarchy, chaos, and we're going to go back 800 years. That's the other part.
Or the other solution is large-scale industrialization, which puts the wealth and control into the hands of a few.
We're there already. We're there in South Africa. We are large-scale agriculture. The subsistence farmer, the small-scale farmer, there's not real fighting scales here. Simply, it's again, large conversations. But yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, we could, the things I could pick your brain about for days, I feel. I would love, I mentioned to Anki actually when we had our first conversation, I don't know if you're aware of a conference and festival that happens every year in June here called Groundswell. Agriculture.
It just happened, or
it just happened. It happened the 23rd, 24th of June. So I don't think I'd quite connected with you guys yet, but I think everything that you've described to me, I think would be of great interest to that festival. I would love to connect you with the organisers, and with the best will in the world to maybe shake your hand there next year if they can arrange that. But it's how, so the whole concept of regenerative agriculture is in the UK is starting to gather pace now from, I guess, the 4 years that I was aware of it. So I don't know if you know anything about my background, but I studied food science. I became a long-term vegetarian in response to the BSE crisis in the UK, which was 1989. I stopped eating meat, and I didn't eat it for 25 years after that, whenever that is. So about 7 or 8 years ago, through health reasons, really, I put animal products back in my diet and had this incredible rebound of health, and it was profound and extraordinary, and I felt connected to the life force in my food like I never had eating a pure kind of vegetarian diet. And that kind of led me to start this company. And I was looking online to try and buy the kind of meat that I thought I should be eating, both for my health and for the health of the planet. And I couldn't really find it. I was going to farmers markets, and sometimes even the farmers markets didn't seem to know where the exact provenance of where things had come from. And that sort of led me into starting this business. And it was only about kind of 4 years ago that I first became aware of this term, regenerative agriculture. The concept that animals kept correctly, mostly animals, it's mostly referred to animals I feel at the moment, but animals kept correctly could have a net benefit to the environment, or to have a net benefit to some element of the environment, whether it's carbon sequestration, whether it's improving biodiversity on the land, improving the viability of the soil, whatever it is. But now I feel we've got to a point in this country where government ministers are starting to work out how can we communicate this to the policymakers. As you know, we've left the EU, which means we're now free to make our own decisions regarding how the government intervenes with agriculture. And for the first time, I was dead against us leaving the EU. I was definitely in the Remain category. It's caused an awful lot of problems in this country, but, and this is the only but, we are now free to rewrite the rule book on agriculture. And if regeneration starts becoming a part of that, and the potential for that, I can see a benefit to us, having that freedom. Where you are, how deep does even the understanding of the possibility of regenerative agriculture go in terms of informing policy, government, and the people actually making decisions as to what you can and can't do? You've mentioned a lot through our conversation of things you're not allowed to do. Is there a shift at all? Is it starting to change?
Sure. I think firstly, getting back to yourself in the UK, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we will face is going to be the youth, and it's going to be the lack of education and the fact that we have engineered them out of nature. That we need to bring back their understanding of where the milk and the beef and where everything comes from. Because there is a very strong drive to not drink milk. People say, well, humans are the only animals that drink milk. Well, we're also the only animals that drink like soya milk and almond milk, and we're special. We are special. So just put us in this
and drive cars and talk on Zoom calls, and
that's us. So I think certainly there, and because when we look at policy is kind of public opinion. And at the moment, like a lot of the things that we talk about are not public opinion, because it's based on, how many people have actually taken a tractor and sowed like or plowed a whole field in the sun, or have grown granola, or have harvested a chicken? Very few people. So it's very few people who are connected to the earth and the understanding. So it means that you've got a small group of passionate farmers that would like to go in this direction, and then you have your policymakers. But I think that beyond all of that, that the only way forward is going to power, or look at sort of some kind of drive where you can expose the youth. And the best way is to get their hands dirty. I work with the youth, and they don't want to get their hands dirty. They're petrified. They think they're going to get like syphilis or gonorrhea or some
from the soil.
From the soil, it's puffy. But but it's scientifically proven. I think there was a study in Finland where it basically helped them, being exposed to microbes in the earth, just changed these young people. They became better. Anyway, so that's where we are right now. Look, I think we're in a crisis in South Africa. I can only speak in South Africa. We're in a crisis. Protein is becoming too expensive. The majority of people out on meat on the street haven't had beef maybe in 5-6 months. It's a luxury. The closest they're getting is some second-rate chicken, maybe if they're lucky. The majority, it's peanut butter and rice and maize meal. So where's it going? It's shifting times. I think that I'm hoping that what we are doing here in South Africa from a ground perspective is to try advocate more thought. I've formulated a 1 hectare mock-up. I've got all the data for it, and so this is how we can do it. But it would fall on deaf ears if it doesn't have education. If I keep on going back, it's about education, because it's stuff that you can't YouTube or Google.
But education from the literally the grassroots level is the approach that you're taking, is just get people educated, and this will allow the information to flow.
Well, I think let's look at the UK. Let's put it right now and say, okay, right. I mean, how many UK pig farmers are there? And they're going to say maybe you'll get like 1,000 or 2,000 UK, but they know a very specific way. It's on a cement floor. The grain comes delivered to them, and you say, well, how many farmers in the UK could farm like how my great grandfather in the backyard, like what to feed it, how to deworm it, how to slaughter it? That number's going to sink. So when it comes to education beyond the grassroots level, when we actually look at the pool of knowledge, it's actually quite limited. So people who have that knowledge are making their money doing, I don't know, doing talk shows or whatever. But the point is, it's very difficult that knowledge is, and it's disappearing. That pool of knowledge is disappearing. I mean, here's a crazy thought. Forget there, Cuba in 1989, Cuba falls. Russia doesn't start delivering the fuel anymore. Those tractors aren't working. And there's like these 3 half-dead, 95-year-old in the shade guys who knew how to plow a field with oxen, how to brace oxen. Because again, take a room of 10,000 people and say, who knows how to brace oxen so we can plow the field?
You're going to get no.
Can you find it on YouTube? I don't know. There's a challenge, but it's knowledge, and this knowledge is disappearing. So when we look at that, it's kind of like, go look how farmers are trained. They go to a farm school. That farm school teaches them the same shit that we've been teaching all the other farmers. It doesn't change. The herbicide company, the chemical company, everyone knocks on the door. So there's a system. So when we're looking at education, I think firstly, like urban agriculture, certain things have been defined. We define regenerative agriculture, we can put it up, but now we need to start practicing it. And with practicing it, we need to have advocates and ambassadors for that. And to do that, then people need to have education for those who have been doing it, and say, well, this is what we've done, and especially pertaining to animal husbandry. Incorporating that aspect to it.
So a slow process starting from the bottom of the pyramid is the way that things are going to happen, I believe.
But the luxury of doing nothing is gone. We don't really have that luxury anymore of slow, because I think it was in World War II in your country, the UK, that there were more pigs than there were people, because everybody had a backyard pig. Yep. So you come from a time, but it's kind of like not that far short. They would probably find somebody in an old age home that might remember that. So that's almost gone now. So it was once upon a time there. It was once upon a time there, but our disconnection from it is
well, and of course at that time as well, our great grandparents of that occasion, then apart from the protein aspect, their access to cooking oils would have been lard, tallow, and butter, and that is it. That is it. I mean, a little while ago,
potatoes or milk.
I did a bit of a deep dive to understand as well as I could as a non-academic the difference between vegetable oils and animal-based fats, and lard is pretty much one of the healthiest fats that a human being can eat. Super high oleic acid and saturated fat, and I do believe that a lot of the prevalence of a lot of disease has come from replacing that with vegetable oils. Well, more specifically seed oils. I think there's a difference between seed oils and fruit oils. So fruit oils being coconut, olive oil, etc. But the seed oils that dominate our fat consumption now, as opposed to our grandparents, which were using animal fats.
We had our lard tested by a scientist, and there's about 7 lard or pork fat scientists on the planet.
Right.
An Italian, it's a story, I'll try to give you the example. There was an Italian descendant who wanted to make salami in South Africa and set up a company, a couple of million down, and it was working because the concept wasn't working. So he was importing, I think it was Belgium fat, and he couldn't find the fat in South Africa. And he asked me for it because the professor, it was in the Orange Free State, which is there, wanted a case, like a control from somewhere local. And we were put under the green gorilla. They'd sent us back the scientific test. I mean, they've tested everything. And our pork fat outmaneuvered the imported Belgian fat, outmaneuvered anything out in the market. And for the simple reason is that the professor said maybe is that the pork that he was buying was done, and the recipe that was made from was in a time where the pigs were raised differently.
Right.
Okay, so it was kind of like he said, yeah, he was talking predominantly about the fat ratio, what their diet, how they lived, etc., etc., etc. My further, okay, bit of one of those, but would be also based on that part was also based on the fact how the animal was slaughtered. So there is living proof, and the irony is that so I'm sitting on the most impressive, because this was an international pork imported fat. It was like the blue cheese of pork fat from Belgium. Okay, the best for what ticks all the boxes. So I've got a pork fat that is illegal to sell. I produce the best pork fat that takes out an international pork fat. I can't move it, I can't sell it, but scientifically I can prove it. It just shows where we are, and ain't going to change. Maybe our children's children might change the problem, but I think that human beings are galvanized to change, and it's certainly where our food has been incorporated to the corporation. And where I feel driving back to education like a stuck record is that that's how for us to preserve the knowledge and allow that knowledge that is still the lineage of this knowledge before it's completely gone, because it's not on Google, it's not on YouTube. No. It's people's life knowledge that needs, because when I was learning to farm, I went to old people, I asked them things, and they told me things like people with like one tooth and they're like sucking their biscuit in their tea, and it's like, that's how I learned. I spoke to old people, and they loved to entertain me, and we had great conversations. So I think there is that. So yeah. Are we beyond the topic? Did we get a bit lost a little bit?
No, I don't think we did at all. I think we've stayed on the rails pretty well, and I think we've sort of covered off an awful lot of aspects. I would, we've done about an hour and 10 minutes, so we should probably kind of wrap up, or no one's going to listen to us blabber on for this long. But I don't know. Is there anything I will, of course, get details of where people can find out about what you're doing, and I will share them with this episode when we publish it. But I'd just like to thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. I've never quite come across anyone who's doing what you're doing. And if there's anything that we can do to kind of spread the message about what you're doing, I don't know how much reach we have in your country, but I'd love to think that maybe at some point we could get you over here to talk about what you're doing and try and help put you in front of the right audience.
Well, thank you. And mountains never meet, but people always do. So it's, let's not rule that one on. Bang goes the neighborhood. And
it's a pretty easy overnight flight between with no time difference between where we are as well.
Well, thank you for chatting, and good chat. And over to you.
Well, fingers crossed we meet. Either I can come and visit you, or you can come over this way for potentially next year's groundswell, which would be wonderful.
Sounds good.